All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And today we've got a very special guest joining us on the Property Couch. We are talking to someone that's going to prepare us, Ben, for the next wave of population growth and where property investors need to be thinking. And we also talk about the concept that we have little experience in this country, Ben, class division. And is it going to land here? We talk about that and more. What else do we cover?
Well, Bryce, as we unpack the demographics of this whole situation, we're going to look at aspiration and behaviours. What are the three biggest things that each generation is focusing on? And what are their three biggest fears in today's show?
What are the three biggest fears, folks? You got to wait. Stick around for those. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And as I say every week, mate, welcome back to you too.
Mate, it's great to be here. It's, Melbourne's had a bit of nice warmer weather just recently and sort of feeling like spring is sort of, we're through the back end of winter. And I've got to look forward because I really don't have much to think about with the footy season. So
why should every other state have blue sky, not us, Ben? We've had it over the weekend. It was wonderful. It was
it was lovely. It's a whole new novel thing for winter in Melbourne.
Novel.
Hey, mate, I'm getting on the Freo bandwagon. I really, even though we've got a mathematically chance of making the finals,
is that just because it's domestically a strategic move for you, given your wife follows Freo?
No, I'm all in, mate. I've got to have something to look forward to.
2 weeks, so there's a catch.
No catch. I'm in.
Yeah.
I am Freo for the first.
Because the pies are out, mate. There's
Freo for the first. Let's get some silverware in that cabinet. Freo, we are Freo doctors.
Talent's there. Hey, before we move on, Ben, we just got to talk. How's your coach having a little? We needed to give him a packet of tissues because he was upset that a 50-meter penalty wasn't paid. No. And then, Ben, he goes, if that was at the MCG, it would have been paid, which opens up a Pandora's box where you get 17 games a year, only 17 games a year in front of your own crowd over there in Melbourne, Ben.
Still would have been paid, Bryce.
And then every grand final is played at your home ground, mate. So my heart was bleeding for your coach because he was justified in that misguided, uninformed, missing reading the room of having a little whinge.
Do I get a right of reply?
No.
I don't? Okay.
No.
Other than the 80,000 people that show up every week that pays for these struggling teams to keep them actually afloat so they actually get to play.
There we go. Oh, see what happened there? Did you see what happened there? Oh, he's a nice guy, follows free. And then a little bit of squeeze.
Go for it.
Squeeze. We thought the orange juice was going to come out, Ben, but what came out? Lemon juice, mate. Lemon juice came out. Hey, it's not until we're under pressure.
Go for it.
Hey, webinar next week, you and I.
Yes.
Ben.
Yes.
The 20th. So put this in your diary, folks. Tuesday the 20th, 7:30 p.m. Just for the record, it's Australian Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah.
Here's the webinar, Ben. Data to decisions, Moore's tools for savvy property investors. We're basically going to show you how to get out of spreadsheets, Ben.
Yep.
If you've got one property, you've got 10 properties, you've got 50 properties. We know somebody's got over 100 properties. Guess how they manage their properties, Ben? In an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
We're going to show you the alternative.
Moving on.
If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/Ben, it's a mouthful, more webinar. And if you're wondering how to spell more, Ben, it's MOOR. So more webinar. That's what you got to remember. Thepropertycouch.com.au/more webinar. Go and register. You and me, we're doing it live, aren't we, mate? We're going to be in room together.
We are. We're going to be doing it live next Tuesday night.
So, folks, turn up for that. And then, Ben, we're going to do a mid-year update next week.
Yes, we're going to go into, obviously the property market doesn't start until around Feb, so we're going to really start to ramp that up in terms of that story. So we'll go deep, revisit what we said in Feb in terms of what we've seen eventuate and how we see the rest of the year playing out. Also, a quick reminder to everyone, we'll put the details in the show notes, but the Picker survey, really important, that sentiment survey. It's coming to the final week now. It's coming to the final week. I've done mine. Have you done yours, Bryce?
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you for doing that. So get those surveys in. As it said, it's coming to the final week, so it's really important that we get all that information together, and we'll present that in a big way in September with all those results as well. So thank you very much for that as well.
And the final thing, Ben, before we move on to today's very, very exciting show is Summer Series Shout-Out. We are now the 15th of August, Thursday the 15th of August, Ben. So we're in the shadows of getting ourselves ready to hear from our community. And we set the goal back in February, Ben, to say, hey, look, let's set your year up. So where are the folks, Ben, who have had a wonderful year? They've done what they said that they would do, and they've got a story to tell. So I just want to do a little shot across the bow. We're coming for you. We'd love for you to be on the Property Couch Summer Series this year. And please, 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 if you think that you don't have any stories to share, even though you followed it, I promise you that's where most of the gold lives. So, Ben, more for that. I'm coming back for that again, but I just wanted to do a little.
Love it. Can't wait for those episodes. They're great.
At this point in time. All right, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is a reel. I like finding these little reels. Let our audience have a listen, and then we can reflect on it. But this one is by Jordan Peterson, obviously 12 Rules for Life. I've never heard anything that Jordan Peterson has had to say that just hasn't profoundly moved me, right? So this one I thought was really good. It's called Your Life is Not Margaritas on a Beach in Jamaica. Let's have a little listen.
Your life isn't margaritas on a beach in Jamaica. That happens now and then. Those are exceptions. Your life is how your wife greets you at the door when you come home every day. Because that's like 10 minutes a day. Your life is how you treat each other over the breakfast table. Because that's an hour and a half or an hour every single day. You get those mundane things right, those things you do every day. You concentrate on them and you make them pristine. It's like you got 80% of your life put together. These little things that are right in front of us, they're not little. That's the first thing. They are not little, and they're hard to set right. And if you set them right, it has a rippling effect, and fast too, way faster than people think.
That happens now and then. They're exceptions. The margaritas are exceptions, Ben. So get the mundane things right. The things you do every day. You concentrate on them and make them pristine. And then, how's this for profound wisdom? Then you have 80% of your life put together. These little things are right in front of us. Firstly, they're not little. Secondly, they're hard to set right. And if you set them right, Ben, they have a ripple effect that moves super fast, way faster than you think. So here's my takeaways, Ben. I listened to this about a month ago. And I've been married for 16 years. So this is something that I've been marinating on for that last month in response to my own relationship with my dearly beloved Andrea. So I've been making a huge effort on just focusing on the little things because I'm in that sort of been married for 16 years, got to, make sure that I don't take anything for granted. So the dividends from that and the response and the exchanges that my wife and I are having have been amazing because I showed her. And so we've made an investment in our marriage for that. So That's number one.
Love it.
Number two, Ben, how do I land the plane for wealth creation? Well, the same principle applies. The millionaire next door is not created sipping margaritas on the beach all day, every day. They are created getting the mundane things right, Ben. The mundane things right. Spend less than you earn, Ben. Do a budget.
Spend less.
Trap where it goes, watch where it goes, take a little bit and put it into experiences now, but put a big chunk into experiences for tomorrow. Those are the little mundane things that you need to get right, which I think Jordan Peterson, out of context a little bit about what he was saying in this, but I think if we apply it, I certainly think there's some wisdom for our folks to marinate themselves as we go into the weekend, Ben. So food for thought.
Love it. Love it, Bryce.
All right, let's crack on to the show, Ben. We have got a very special guest. He is a returning guest. His name is Mark McCrindle. Let's cut to the interview you and I recently had with Mark McCrindle. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. We are chatting with Mark McCrindle. Mark is a social analyst and demographer whose passions lie in tracking social trends, communicating insights, and generational analysis. In addition to being the author of 5 books, Ben, Mark coined the term for the latest generation, which is Generation Alpha. Since founding McCrindle in 2006, Mark has presented thousands of keynotes and workshops in all major industries, including finance, technology, health, mining, energy, and education for top global brands and organizations. Mark is an advisor to executive boards and committees across Australia, and as a sought-after demographer, futurist, and social commentator, he's delivered over 100 keynotes in the last year alone. Welcome back to the Property Couch, Mark.
Thanks, Bryce. Always good to be with you. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to have you. But Mark, with your deep insights into generational trends, and you bring a unique lens to the world of money and finance. So how can understanding generational trends be the hidden gem that help individuals make more informed and strategic choices about their money and finances?
Well, because we all sit even as family members, within a generation, and there's an intergenerational connection that just comes with our upbringing and with our family situation. So even understanding impact of parents on children, for those that are parents, thinking about their children, thinking about the changes that have impacted each of us as we've come of age, the events, the experiences, the life stage factors, all of that's just important in our own personal finance and thinking about the future. But there are demographic overlays, looking at a society impact of finance and generational change. All of this is important to help us understand the national future, the housing forecast, the need for preparedness there, and budgets and the implications long term.
No one ever gets sick of talking about this topic, Mark. I mean, I've been excited about the idea of just ripping in. Our team goes, "Well, I'm excited today about talking about demographics," but it's interesting. It's just numbers, largely produced by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. But the fact that you guys can bring them to life means that anyone who's listening to this podcast should listen with enormous intent, because it can give you some incredible keys to investing and where you need to be and trying to be in front of the wave. But you were previously appeared on this podcast at episode 185, and we're now over 500, Mark. So that was back in the 16th of August, 2018. But what we didn't talk to you about in that episode, and for those who want to check it out, it was a ripper, so go back and have a listen to that one as well. But we didn't cover your personal backstory, Mark. So let's start there. Can you tell us what money conversations were or weren't like growing up over the dinner table when you were younger?
Well, as a Gen Xer growing up in the 80s, parents weren't as transparent about finance, about the future, about housing. The approach then was that you don't talk about your earnings, your salary. We all had a little Commonwealth Bank piggy bank there, Dolomites, or the savings accounts there, and that was probably the extent of any financial literacy. We'd bring along our probably it was a paper $1 note back in the day, and maybe make a little contribution in primary school to our Commonwealth Bank savings, and that was the extent of it. We had passbooks back in the day. You remember that, and you'd see your balance written out there, and very proudly, seeing some interest on that. But that was the extent of it, at least in my upbringing. And I think it certainly has changed now, where getting an understanding of finance, of budgeting, of investment, and even of preparing for the future certainly starts at a lot of a younger age, and parents are a bit more open, I think, in instilling some of that literacy around finance with their children.
Mark, I've definitely noticed that trend as well. I want to double click on, the concept of money. I mean, a lot of us, when we're very young, really just think we used to go to an ATM machine and, used to get cash, and then that cash is what we bought things. When did you start to understand the concept of money and how it was earned, and then sort of how it was dealt with in your household? Like, did you go without? Were there any sort of challenges around the haves versus have-nots, and what you were getting versus your peers?
Well, early on, at least the upbringing in my household was that there wasn't any sit-down money. You had to earn your own money, and so from paper runs as a 9 or 10-year-old through to and leaflet deliveries, then through to getting those part-time jobs when I was 15, 16. That started to be on the revenue side, earning some money, and then on the managing that money, it was the era of advantage saver type accounts or deposit type accounts, where if you didn't withdraw from that, there was that bonus interest, and that really motivated me as an older teenager to manage the money, to value savings, not just spending, and I saw the miracle of compound interest right there as a youngster, and saw the benefit of that. So I guess that put me on a bit of a a money management pathway, and both on the fact that you've got to earn money if you want to move forward, and you've got to manage that money well and try to leverage that money if you want to step forward in the finances. That was instilled in me through those experiences early on.
Now, do you class yourself as a saver or a spender in those younger days?
I was a saver, and I did see the benefit of that. And house prices were a bit more affordable back in the day than they are today, perhaps. But nonetheless, we still learned to save and to prepare for the future. And it was an era as well where you would be probably by the early 20s, you're out on your own financially. You were making your own way in life, and there was a lot to be said for that, rather than the sort of never-ending, hey, stay at home till you're ready approach of today. At least with my kids, no sign of them leaving anytime soon. But I think that financial independence, that sense of autonomy and responsibility and a little bit of self-reliance was a little bit more the norm for us Gen Xers.
And my final question in this area, Mark, is brothers and sisters. Did you have any brothers and sisters growing up as well?
Yeah, I did. I was the youngest of three kids, so saw them finish uni and get into work early on and move out of home and start to make their own way, and so that was a pretty good example for me, and that was the pathway that I took as well.
Were they savers or spenders? Did you sort of notice a difference between your brothers and sisters?
Maybe it's the Scottish background as McCrindles. We all tend to be pretty much savers in my siblings.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a good thing.
Hopefully not too much on the stingy side, but I certainly saw a lot more saving than largesse. And I know from my parents, there wasn't much pocket money coming my way, I can tell you. So had to save, had to earn.
There we go.
Well, as we round out this part of the discussion, Mark, what did that mean when you moved into independence? So you left home, and clearly it sounded like you had a run rate of being a saver and being diligent and looking after what you had. But when you were independent and you had to sort it out for yourself, what were you leaning on to sort of navigate those early 20 years? Were you just continuing to be a saver? Was there a mentor that you saw? Was there observations you made with mum and dad that you sort of implemented in that independence?
Well, firstly, I saw the benefit of education, and I invested in education from a time perspective, but this was the start of HEX, where you had to pay your own way in terms of accumulating that study debt, but saw that as an investment, and over the long term, when you look back now after decades, you do see the benefit of that. So had that as a bit of a focus. The university years aren't cheap, as you pay your way through, but with a part-time job, I saw the benefit of that, and probably the classroom learning is one thing, but it's the learning in life that is so key. Learning to manage your budget, pay your way, a sense of pride of being a little bit independent in that regard, and making your own way, your own journey. And it's what you learn, at least I found, in those early jobs, that part-time though they may be, scrappy compared to a profession though they may be, but what you learn in that early experience, interacting with customers or having a boss and responding to their demands, mattered a lot more than what you earn. And I've taken some of those early lessons from bosses and mentors in those early years with me through life.
Mark, you're one of the leading demographers in this country, and I think it would be a fascinating opportunity for you getting around the country, talking to the different industries that you do. But last time we chatted, we just ticked over 25 million people. And you mentioned that the growth from 24 to 25 million took 31 months. Where are we now, and how long did the next million take?
We are at record population increase in an annual rate at the moment. We, post-COVID, with opening up the international borders, people thought maybe it'll take a while to get back to those migration numbers and make up the deficit of what we had when no one was moving to Australia in those years. Well, actually, we sprung back in a very quick way. We've just added more than 650,000 people to our population in 1 year. So you can see that we're adding 1 million in far less than 2 years. It's not the 3 years that we used to see. It's in fact been a little less than 18 months or around that period, just roughly that period. So, and most of that coming through overseas migration, about 560,000 people was the net increase in migration numbers. The natural increase through births was a smaller proportion of that, a little over 120,000. So record population increase, record migration numbers, and record speed at adding that next million. And even though they're dialing down some of the migration over the year ahead, it's still pretty sizable population growth into Australia.
Do you have a view on whether that's a good or a bad thing, or do you just observe?
I do think that, we need to manage migration. We in our research, we look at the demographics, but we run a lot of focus groups and national surveys as well. And Australians are all for the cultural diversity of this nation. In fact, most people, more than half the population, either themselves were born overseas or they have at least one parent born overseas. So we're a migrant majority nation. We see the richness that comes from that, from our food to our festivals to our global connectivity. Australians love the richness of our cultures and the migration program, but they want to have a sense that it's manageable. And when they start to see the pain points of that, which is really through increased commute times or traffic jams or having to wait to get into hospital, or maybe this kids can't get into the local school, or maybe it's just the kids being priced out of the property market, they do point the finger at migration. Not migration as a concept, but record or unmitigated migration growth. And that's where Aussies are at. They don't love the concept of big Australia where we just have as many as we can because that's a boost to the economy. They're saying that might be good for the big end of town, might be great for the big property developers, and maybe the universities that are turning a lot of coin through overseas migration with students. But it is starting to impact on the population, on the general suburban lifestyle. So I think having a modest and managed migration program is really where Australians are at, and I think that's sensible.
And Mark, so where do you see that sweet spot? We've had, as you say, these big fluctuations, right? Where some years were around 180,000 and some years around 320,000. And then obviously we had that huge spike post-COVID. Where in your mind do you think that sweet spot is where we're getting that balance right between, growing the economy? Because we do know that, net positive migration is actually net jobs creation. It's not the other way around. There's a lot of misinformation out there that basically it's people taking away other jobs. But we do know just through consumption alone that there's net positive migration from having a greater population. Where do you think that sweet spot is in terms of what you've seen in the data?
Firstly, I think it's getting back to the long-term averages of the mix in our population growth between migration and natural increase. Migration is great in terms of an instant hit, but you need the natural increase. You need the births because that deals with the aging curve we're on. It creates the multi-generational society, ensures that we have families and children and education for the future, which migration alone, it might plug an immediate gap for skills shortages, but it doesn't provide the diversity of age. And the long-term average has been a little more of our growth, about 55 to 60% through migration and about 40 to 45% through natural increase. We need to get back to that. At the moment, 82% of our growth is through overseas migration. So we've blown out of those long-term ratios. And if that means that we need to increase the birth rate or encourage, provide the environment so families can have an extra child or can start a family earlier than waiting till they're 30-somethings. That's probably a good thing. So it probably means dialing down migration, trying to encourage a bit more of the birth rate and probably getting, in terms of annual numbers, to about the 350,000 that we've had long term, which will mean we'll add an extra million people probably every 3 or so years. And that means probably net migration of about 250,000 and maybe 100,000 natural increase is where we need to be. And keep in mind, that's about a third of the migration numbers that we're seeing at the moment, but it does line up with the long-term average over the last 2 decades.
Mark, last time we chatted, you said that Melbourne was on track to beat Sydney in population by 2026, but that was before COVID. Is there any adjustment to that? Is there any gun-shy people at the gates of moving into Victoria?
We're not far off it. Probably 2 years away from Melbourne overtaking Sydney, because Melbourne is back, or Victoria is back as our fastest growing state, back in the migration stakes particularly. What has changed since the pandemic is that Melbourne or Victoria used to see three factors of growth. There was that they were leading in terms of the overseas migration. They were doing pretty well just based on population with natural increase, but they also were seeing a net gain from an interstate migration perspective. Melbourne was a bit more affordable than Sydney. Had a robust economy, and so people looking at a city, they said, "Oh well, we're looking for a bit of action. Maybe we go to Melbourne rather than Sydney." So they were the net beneficiaries there, whereas people were a bit priced out of Sydney. Now that has changed because Melbourne has, like Sydney now, become a net deficit city. It's losing more people to the rest of Australia than it's gaining. So that has slowed down some of what might have been the growth of Melbourne. But still, it's only slightly in the negative. Sydney loses a lot more than it gains from a national perspective because, again, house pricing, affordability, and also livability with commute times and the like. Melbourne, a bit more of that public transport infrastructure, the affordability, the rollout of the greenfield developments, Western Melbourne, and also, it still is a bit of an engine room in the economy, but it's slowed down. It's lost a little bit of its luster over the last few years, but probably in the next 2 years it will overtake Sydney. And with that, I think that crown of the number one city by population comes a bit of kudos, comes a bit of a relocation of maybe head offices, and will probably be a virtuous cycle to attract more internal migration as well.
So, Mark, let's now start to talk about the sort of demographics, to help frame up some of the conversation that we're going to have later in this conversation. We've got obviously these categories in terms of the buckets that we create around the different types of demographics, from the builders, which is pre-1945, the baby boomers, which is 1946 to 1964, Gen X, which is 1965 to 1979, which is all of us. Then you've got the Gen Y, which is 1980 to 1994. And then you've got the Gen Zs, which is 1995 to 2009. And then the one you coined, which is the Alpha, 2010 to 2024. Obviously, a little quick question there. Is Beta going to be from 2025? Do you think? Is that the logical next one?
It is. There you go. You've called it, Ben. Generation Beta. And
oh no, I'm not going to take credit for that, Mark. No, that's in your camp. And of course, the other one that we call the Gen Ys, they're millennials. So a lot of people refer to them as millennials as part of the Gen Y. So that's the sort of buckets that sort of we've been all put into as these generational transitions happen. What was fascinating in some of your research and some of your infographics and some of the great presentations you've delivered is how we think about the wealth creation, the income, the interests and desires that those particular different demographics have. So I think that's a really nice starting point for sort of talking through those and comparing those generations in terms what is significant for them, and how does that show up in both their behavior and also their attitudes.
Yeah, well, definitely it shapes us across a multitude of areas. I think that's what's so helpful about understanding the generations, because at the start it defines us by life stage, and that's pretty self-evident. The baby boomers in their 60s into their 70s, they're thinking about retirement. They're thinking about that stage of life. Gen Xers, those of us now late 40s and 50s in the parenting years, but just starting to get a little bit of independence there and thinking about next stage for us. Millennials are building families, building careers, building wealth, and the younger ones starting out. So life stage is a key factor. But the other factor, it's not just life stage, because otherwise we wouldn't need to talk about generations. We'd just talk about life stage, those in their 50s, those in their 40s. But see, the era that we're shaped in also impacts us. We discussed that a little bit, growing up as Gen Xers and even the norms in family or how we talked finance, that's quite different to today. The finfluencers on TikTok and learning, a little bit about finance from social media, which is the lot of young people today. So even though we've all shared the same life stages, we haven't all shared the same life stages in the era of the internet and social media and these devices. So the times, the events, the experiences, the culture, the social values leave fingerprints on generations in different eras and shape them differently. That's what creates the richness of the segments of generations: life stage, age, times, events, experiences, the social issues that we live through. Even, for example, financial events, financial crises. As Gen Xers, we saw the meltdowns in the late 1980s there, the stock market crash and the recession we had to have there in 1991. That shaped us. That instilled a little bit of a work ethic, bit of a fear that, hey, things go up, but they also go down. That jobs, you can't guarantee them, that it's not always full employment, that you need to be grateful for a job and grab onto that. And that instilled a different characteristic in us than the millennials that really for the first 20 years of their life just had an economic clear run. And so all of that does shape us and shapes our attitude to money, to finance in the future.
How does that really shape the outlook for prosperity, or for, to the point we're chatting about here is the income and wealth across generations? Because I think the era you're shaped in matters. Like my dad was 1939 in the shadows of wars and depressions. I was in the shadows of a recession, whereas millennials had 30 years of economic prosperity. And just the way that we squirrel away, even listening to your backstory, I'm an ex like you, so there's similarities to what you talked about. And I guess that does play into, the narrative around property now, because you've got young people saying they can't get on the ladder, but they've also had the benefit of not having to have a lot of those early scars that we had to have. And so therefore they invest in lifestyle, and they invest in choice, and they invest in mobility, and they invest in having a look at other opportunities. So is that, how does that era you're shaped in really project forward into some of the folks that have had a pretty good run, despite the fact that it's hard to get into the property market? I get it, deposits are hard for younger people, but they haven't had some of those scars that we've had to.
No, that's so true, and it does shape that attitude, that spending, that approach to life. The baby boomers are the highest net worth generation in Australia. Those in their 60s and into their 70s, partly because they've had longer to save, partly because they saw the benefit of property price appreciation over their life, but partly because they got into property early because they sacrificed other things. And the younger generation can point the finger and say, oh, they're the lucky generation, this economic miracle, they got houses when they can afford it. But they could afford it because they did sacrifice, and they didn't do the overseas trips, and they didn't spend money on lifestyle, and they paid off the debt as quickly as they could. And most of them didn't even have credit cards when they were beginning out, and the buy now, pay later concept was anathema to them. It is different today. And, we can appreciate there's a bit more support. Families are able to support children a bit longer. They're investing in their own education. That's a great thing. They start their earnings a bit later for that reason. And we can appreciate that, getting a degree under your belt is more normative now, and probably a good investment to make. But it also means that they're starting their earnings a little later, and they're spending their 20-somethings a little bit more in travel and experiencing the world and on lifestyle pursuits. This is not universal for every person in the generation, but largely it's what we find consistently in our research. I was just sitting around the table at my office, and I've got a lot of young Gen Ys in my team, and I was saying, I just got back from Rome. I'd never been to Rome before. Here I am, hit 50, never been to Rome. And the 20-somethings say, I've been 2 times. I've been 3 times. And it was just a little anecdote to highlight that actually, they travel more. They're happy to spend money on intangibles. They're happy to experience a little bit more and invest in those experiences, which was quite different to the Gen X, and certainly different to the generation that went before. And so, there's a benefit that comes from that. If you spend your money on experiences and lifestyles, you'll travel more, you'll gain more of those life skills and that education. But probably getting into property and the finances is going to be a little bit more of a struggle. And the baby boomers are reaping the rewards of the sacrifice that they had early on. So yeah, I think that our financial state does play out long term based on our attitude to money and our approach to spending.
And Mark, there's a really important point in there that also is they're going to live potentially 10 or 20 years longer than those older generations. So, I mean, that is always the challenge for governments, right, in terms of getting the balance right. I'm a massive believer in open free markets and growing the economic pie. And then, obviously, when you grow the pie, there's more tax revenue to support the more vulnerable in the community. But you've still got to show up and give it a go and have effort as part of that. I mean, we're very fortunate to be living in such a rich country where that opportunity provides itself. But to the point you're making, there has been a trade-off in some respects, and that is land value and obviously building a home where you potentially want to live, where all the action is, as opposed to having to live out wide, has been more challenging for some, and that expectation of having the white picket fence and having a bit of land as part of the lifestyle that that they grow up with is a bit more challenge for them. So I understand that there'll always be that challenge and battle between those types of things. I reckon that's a good segue into what are those significant differences that we're seeing around financial aspirations. So I'll just read through this particular list, and then we'll start to sort of build some dialogues around that. But builders, 51% said taking regular holidays. 50% said having trusted group of friends and family around them as they're aging and need that additional support. 43% says having a happier marriage. The boomers, 57% being financially independent. This is going to be a theme running right through going forward. 50% says taking regular holidays. 46% said having trusted groups of friends and family around them. Gen X, which is again our generation, being financially independent, top ranked. Having a good work-life balance, number 2, as we start to get a bit of that freedom and time of our kids getting a little bit older. And then 50% said taking regular holidays. Gen Y, having a good work-life balance. So this is that difference in terms of there's that Rome trip showing up in terms of I'm not going to wait until I'm 50, I'm going now. So 60% in that sense. Then you got the 55 saying having good work. Where am I? 50% saying being financially independent. So that's still ranking pretty high in the top 3 still. And then 49% taking regular holidays. And then Gen Z, 63% owning a home. Naturally, that's on the life stage that they're on, so it's on their radar. 62% said being financially independent, and 61% said having a good work-life balance. So alphas aren't really in the money management space just yet, so we won't necessarily talk to them. A couple of quick, one quick point for me that I want you to probably expand on. Even with the Gen Zs, 62% said being financially independent was still higher than any other category in any other generational group. Yet it was still number 2 behind owning a home. But money is which is what you alluded to earlier. Money is becoming more and more important, or money management or money awareness is becoming more and more important. And I think that is a great thing, in terms of because ultimately it becomes part of the decisions and behaviors that I make. So what else did you take out of, those particular findings?
Yeah, that's a great point, Ben, that the older generation were part of growing up in a social contract where you work hard and you pay your tax, but when you retire, there's a government pension there for you. Or if you hit some hard luck and something goes wrong, there's a safety net, and that's how the economy worked. But the younger generations have seen that actually that safety net is not guaranteed, at least not if you want a particular lifestyle. If you want options, and if you want to be in charge of your own destiny, you probably need your own financial independence. And with the aging profile of the population, they've pretty much recognized that the pension is not going to be universal. And even if it is, it's not going to sustain them with the lifestyle and the longer years that they have. So that's why this independence in finances has become such a key focus. And that's a positive thing because it's good for the national economy, it's good for the taxpayer, and it's good for the individual, where they then have more options and they're not reliant on a safety net. They're in charge of their own destiny a little bit more. But it does mean that they've got to get some strategies around that. And what has proven over the long term in Australia to provide that nest egg has been the family home, has been a place that you live in, because firstly, it means that you're building an asset that gives you that security. It's got a benefit. It's something that historically, almost without exception over the long term, has appreciated. It becomes the retirement vehicle that people can downsize from. So it's that proven base, and it's a stable base. It's safe as houses for a reason. But the other important thing is it provides that mortgage, gives them an incentive to pay that down. It's forced savings. And the challenge with those who aren't getting into property or feel priced out or feel that maybe just the lifestyle of travel is maybe more where they're at is that sure they've got high earnings when they're younger and high cash flow. They don't have the dependence, they're not locked into a lot of expenses, school fees or other things. So they can spend it for sure and enjoy the lifestyle, but they're not forced into any savings. And so when the 20-somethings run out, they've had some great times, great experiences under their belt, lots of Instagram posts, but perhaps not any significant savings or a pathway to get there. And that's why what went on in the past with the boomers and the Gen Xs is probably a good track to follow for the younger ones, and why now the Gen Zs, who are getting a bit more serious, they lived through the GFC. That was an early experience for them. They saw a little bit of upset there in their early years, seeing their parents go through a bit of anxiety, and they're saying maybe I need to focus in a bit on some financial independence and a pathway to get there.
And let's not forget, the debt that they do bring in that journey. That's probably another separation. So I know that there'll be probably a few people driving in the car listening to this. You don't forget, we've also got that student debt. Yeah. So let's recognise that for what it is, because it's true, absolutely. So it is a little bit harder, to save for that deposit.
Mark, I'd love your thoughts on this idea, which is kind of an extension there. That we talked previously on this podcast about the sandwich generation, which we've defined as the generation that's stuck in the middle. They weren't the great Australian dream is just to lay down misère, and they're not in the bank of mum and dad prop up, and they're stuck in the middle, right? And so I'd love your thoughts on whether or not we're headed for a class division in this country that we haven't seen before. Because if you think about in the UK, where you've got the upper class, it's usually based on land ownership. And in Australia, up until now, it's just been normalised that we're going to participate in the great Australian dream. But as we're now seeing that sandwich generation and lots of permutations that we get where people can't get onto the ladder, if we extrapolate that 10, 15, 20 years' time, and to the point that you said before about forced savings that comes from having a mortgage, those people will have this reverse compounding effect of being further and further out and have more of the haves and haves not. So what's your observation? What do you call that? And are we headed for class division?
Yeah, there's a little bit more of that, Bryce, and it's quite contrary, as you said, to Australia's history. We've been the land of the middle class. We've been an egalitarian society. We early migration moved away from the class system of England and said, hey, this is the land of opportunity. It's the lucky country and everyone gets to go. And even when you look at the suburbs, they've always been the great melting pot of everyone. There's some utes in some of the driveways there, those that left school year 9, year 10, tradies, alongside doctors or professionals who went through uni, and it didn't matter what you did in your pathway. You could earn some dollars, you could save, and you could buy a home. But as that home ownership gets out of reach of some, and as the debt rises, whether that be study or just lifestyle debt, you end up with people really relying on that intergenerational wealth transfer. They're really relying on their parents to leave them something or to support them in some way, maybe practically, to help get that deposit or to underwrite some of their costs, or maybe just so they can live at home longer while they save. And that's great for those that have the parents with a little bit of support and mechanism. But for those that don't have that, they're really on their own, and they just don't quite get that leverage to get the loan or to get the deposit and to move ahead. So that's part of the challenge. It's that split now where it's not just up to your own individual effort to get a home. You certainly need two incomes. So if someone isn't in a marriage or partnership situation, there's a challenge. You probably need a bit more support beyond that, a good savings behind you, or maybe the bank of mum and dad. And that's where we're starting to see the haves and the have-nots. So that's a bit of a challenge because, it should be home ownership in Australia. That if you work hard and are prepared to make a few sacrifices, you can move forward in life. The other aspect of that sandwich generation does impact certain age groups more than others, and it's us in the 50s, probably from the 40s to the 50s, that are sandwiched between really having to look after elderly parents that might be 70s, 80s, or a bit older, and there's a practical element of that. We take time out and we look after them, and that's obviously important, but there's often a financial side to that as well. Maybe the parents an elderly parent lives with the adult children, maybe there's a bit of support given to get them through some of those times. Certainly, it's at the other end. This is where the other side of the sandwich is, that the 40s and 50s are also looking after their own children and maybe giving a bit of support to them as they move through the expensive time in life, maybe moving into their own 20s or university costs or certainly school fees. And so it comes at that 40s and 50s where it's a particularly crunched point in life, both financially and socially and time-wise and stress-wise, that other generations don't have, where they're a bit free and easy with money, or maybe the older generation where they're free of that and they've got a bit more money to spend and to travel. So, so there's inequities just in life, and it's sort of responding to that and hopefully having a little bit of money under our belt that we've saved that'll help us get through that.
And there's still some context there. I mean, that's really powerful insights, but there's still, I mean, I want to keep reminding people that we are still blessed to be a very lucky country. If we've won the birth lottery into this country as opposed to birth lotteries into, third world areas or, developing nations, that's a battle just to basically have a job and then to get sort of to cut through that and have, really permanent shelter and all of those other things. So, I'm a big believer in, if it is to be, it is up to me. And the life that I make is through choice and decisions that I make. And part of what we're trying to sort of say to people is there's going to have to be some compromise in life, and there's trade-offs in terms of what you do there. And so even if you just get that 1-bedroom apartment to get started on the property ladder, and, just where you decide to have children, try and have that with a bit of a financial backing, preferably having property in behind that is a really good point, because, if you're going to do it the other way around, you do get on struggle street, and it's very, very hard to get off that treadmill in terms of what that looks like. So I think that's a really important point, that, we're talking about generalizations here, but you as the individual, you as the person that we're talking to make the choices that you make, to where you do your hard, to how much effort you put in. And, we also, from the Judo Bank guys, talked about that, that immigration mindset, that work hard, to make good type mindset is also what we want to be teaching to our community. But I do want to sort of segue that into, in the research, talking about the top 3 fears. And of course, let's start with the Gen Zs, because they're the ones who have the most challenge. Let's again acknowledge that. And so these are their top 3 fears. Number 1, I won't have enough money to live comfortably. That comes back to that financial independence. Number 2, never being able to buy my own home. Number 3, being stuck in a job that I don't really enjoy, or, I don't find fulfillment in. Then we go to Gen Ys, and I won't have enough money to live comfortably. There's the money story again. So financial independence, money story sitting there at number 1. Number 2 is not reaching my full potential. Number 3 is suffering a long-term illness. Gen Xers, I won't have enough money to live comfortably. There it is, rocketing to number 1 again. That should be a single in the top 10. Suffering from long-term illness. And then number 3 is not reaching my full potential. And the boomers who have done a lot of their hard now and hopefully are in a sort of a happy place, they're still saying I won't have enough money to live comfortably, ironically, and then suffering long-term illness, and then none. I don't have any fears or worries. So it's good to see that coming through. But number 1, really at the top of the charts, the theme coming through that is this whole idea of fear about not having enough to sustain ourselves. I'm really glad that it's coming up early in conversations for those younger generations. But it's, because again, you talked, Mark, about the power and the magic of compound. Ultimately, that's what we're all about in terms of start your hard early, build up that wealth base that you can build up, and let time sort of do a lot of that heavy lifting. What else can you share in those sort of fears and expand on that story for us, Mark?
Well, yeah, that's right, Ben. And the great thing is that young people have recognized that they're going to live longer, they're going to be active later on average, and they're going to have some higher expenses in those later years if they want to still, upgrade the car and live in their own place and have those options for travel, as we see with the baby boomers today, travel and lifestyle. Then they're going to need to save and to prepare for that. And where we're at in Australia is sometimes the younger generations can look at the baby boomers and say, well, there they are. if you just look at the 60 to mid 70s, they're 20% of the population. They own almost 60% of Australia's national private wealth. So their economic footprint is 2.5 times as large as their demographic footprint. I mean, it's a phenomenal high watermark of wealth attainment. And rather than point the finger at in terms of envy, I think we need to have that as an aspiration to say, wow, they did well. They sacrificed in the younger years. They got into property, and look at the result. So let's use that as a track. Let's use that as a proof point for us as well. And I
Success
think
leads
that
proof.
is, yeah. Well, they have proved it, haven't they? It's phenomenal, and largely not through super sophisticated investing, simply through, as number one, a home that they lived in, but then stepping up over time. Maybe they added a second one, or they upgraded and leveraged that a little bit. But it's pretty straightforward. And over the long term, that's what's provided that pretty incredible statistic that their net worth on average is more than twice their share of population. And they've got the highest wealth of any of the generations, about 1.7 million per household is the average. So it's pretty phenomenal. Now, at the other end, and I think this is the encouraging part of the story, the Gen Zs in their 20s and then into the Gen Ys in their 30s have the highest income of any of the generations. They're earning more than the baby boomers at the moment. And so it's, in other words, just simply a story of taking that high annual earnings and leveraging that into, over time, high wealth. And that comes by following the recipe of those that went before. So rather than feeling envious of those who have the high net worth, let's be grateful for those that have the high annual incomes, the earnings. And that makes sense. The younger generations have invested in their education. They're in demand. It's an aging workforce. They got the pick of jobs. There are more jobs available than people to fill them. What an excellent situation they are in. So they can exchange that time for money at a higher rate than we've ever seen. But it's what they do with that that'll determine whether they become like the baby boomers or whether they, become a little bit experience rich but asset poor in their future.
I think people should rewind and listen to that, Ben. It's profound. The biggest wealth creation tool anyone has is their income. So if you're already in front on income, and I guess as an extension to that, Mark, we can't let this conversation go without leaning into your thoughts on AI, because the younger generation are quicker adopters. They understand it better. They're native to that stuff anyway, whereas us X's, we're a foot in each camp, and then baby boomers are like, what is this? So is that a strategic advantage that they need to take advantage of because they can adopt it so well and get their income so high? And then, to your point, and I think it's the point of this entire podcast, follow the blueprint of the people behind. They turn their income into wealth. If you trade it for experience, is fine, but if you trade it for the path that's previously been trod, you'll end up probably better off.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bryce. And the market sets salaries based on the worth of the person, or we better might say the need we have for the skills that they bring. And what the market is saying is that young people have skills and bring a work approach that we want. That's why they're being paid well. And partly it's the education, partly it's the technology savvy they bring. And this is not just for university graduates. I mean, look at tradies. They're actually earning the top of the charts if you look at those straight out of their studies. So whatever field we're in, we've got high demand for young people. We've got high earnings relative to what we've seen in the past going their way. And if they can invest even further into their use of technology and leverage that, which is their strategic advantage. I mean, they understand AI more intuitively than us Gen Xers. They've grown up with social media, understand how to leverage that to build a brand or build a presence. They understand their generation, the culture, and therefore, the future better than we do. So if they can leverage that for further earnings, then, hey, they can name it in the future. And the other big thing they bring is that they're not just knocking on doors looking for a job. So many of them are creating their own job. They've got the side hustle. They're entrepreneurial. They know how to utilize the gig economy to earn the extra money on the side. So they can work smarter, not just harder. They can have the mainstream salary, which I'd encourage them to get, not just start their own business from scratch, right? So have the security of that, and at the same time sort of use that to branch out and create their side earnings of their own business and then they can leverage their time to produce greater income that they can invest to build that wealth. And they've got a better opportunity than the baby boomers did before, who couldn't start a business unless they had to go to a bank and get a loan. They've got a better opportunity than us Gen Xers, who were learning about PCs when they came out, but didn't understand, the technology intuitively. In the world of AI, the power is with Gen Z, and I really think they can utilize that to their own strategic advantage.
So what does that look like from a demographics perspective going forward? If AI is we don't even know what sort of exponential growth that's having. What for example, what do you feel like that's going to have on the schooling system and the way the curriculum's being taught and the way people don't have to remember things the way that we've had to do it in the past? What's your feedback on how that disrupts the basics of schooling life?
Well, we always tend to get a bit skeptical about new technologies, and that's a historical thing. But, while there'll be some downsides to this, and every technology, ultimately it'll be used by humanity for what technology has always been used for throughout history, which is to create human flourishing, to create better connectivity, to remove drudgery, and to create more wealth as a society and as a civilization. So I think that's largely the future, notwithstanding any sort of negatives that always exist with any new technology, and therefore if they can work out how it can be utilized to leverage their time to outsource to the technology what is repetitive and menial, and pick up the higher value skills. We say from our research to young people that even in the future, the most valuable skills will be those distinctively human ones. So if they can develop people skills, if they have the art of communication, if they know how to resolve conflict, if they've got customer service skills, if they can communicate and bridge diversity, which is their future, cultural, generational, global, then they will do what technology can't do. And look, anything we can outsource to technology, we will, and that comes at an efficiency sense. But if they have the high value skills, the people side of it, then they'll have the good earnings. Hopefully, they'll know how to use the technology, be great, prompt engineers. They'll know what to put in to deliver the content, but they'll bring the people skills, which is really key. They'll therefore be the leaders of tomorrow, and that's where the higher earnings are.
Mark, it's absolutely I love what we're talking about here. Time has flown, so I could talk all day about this sort of stuff. I just really love it because it also gives us clues about where future demand is going to be from a property point of view. But my final question to you is a quick one, and that is: so your judgment is AI is potentially an amplifier of opportunity and potentially jobs more so than some of the sort of concerns around it being something that's going to take a lot of jobs away?
Yeah, totally. It's a net positive, and when it's got the right content, the right information behind it, it's really powerful. And we're blessed in this country to have great data sets, great content. We can even use AI and the latest technologies to distill that down to give us insights and direction to make decisions.
Beautiful.
Mark, for me, as we round for home, I've probably got two questions. The second question will be, the floor is yours. What do you think that people need to know from the perspective of generation setting up for wealth that you have as a unique skill set and what you see? But before we go there, last episode you talked about we doubled every 50 the population every 50 years. So from 1970 to 2020, we grew by 12.5 million. But for us to do that again in 50 years, the next phase will mean we'll grow by 25 million, right? So that's a lot of people. They can't just land in the capital cities where we are now. A ton of them will, but there's got to be spillover. And so where do you think they will go? Where's that spillover going to go? And obviously the question here is to try and prep our property investment savvy audience for a wave. Where's the logical next step for those people to go?
Yeah, it's a great point, Bryce. Regardless of percentage increases in population growth rate, the numerics, the numbers are greater because the population is greater. So as I said earlier, we've just had record annual numbers in our growth, and that will continue. Maybe not every year, but the long-term trend is more numbers per annum. Where are they going to grow? We have to move beyond this capital city-centric model. We have to move beyond Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and maybe Perth. We have to develop our regions, and we've seen that a bit since COVID. We've seen how much people are happy to look to a city. that doesn't mean it's a capital city. They still want a city that's got options and uni campuses and independent school options, but it doesn't have to be a city of 5 million. It can be a city of 100,000, and you get pretty good lifestyle there, like Bendigo or Ballarat or Albury Wodonga or Wagga Wagga, a city of 60,000, and yet it's got great options. And I think that's the future. Probably what we do need is to connect our Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane base with probably fast rail. Cities of 5 million right around, almost every city of 5 million around the world has high-speed rail connection, and just gives options beyond flights. But what it does is opens up the ground between those cities. So you'd have one or two stops that might be 30 minutes away from a city, but might be 150 kilometres away. And that's where you suddenly can open up the greenfield, the regional areas that aren't being utilised with a city, a new smart city. And I think that really is the only way to grow. We have 3/4 of our population in these little dots around the coast, our capital cities. Apart from Canberra, we haven't planted a new city in the last century. Maybe the Gold Coast is an example where we had nothing. Now we've got a big city, but other than that, we haven't done it, and we need to do it because we can't just keep absorbing 1 million people every year and a half in our existing capitals. We need to grow the regions.
What's the catalyst for that to happen? Because it's conceptually we all agree, but what is the catalyst? What's the tipping point? Where do you see the tension being too big to not resolve for that to actually happen?
Well, we're getting to that point now where it's really redlining. Our growth is hitting barriers. The angst is growing in the population. The inaffordability of homes is at a whole new level. The government's target of building 1.1 million homes in the next 5 years is falling short. And even if they did achieve that, the migration numbers are greater than that's only going to absorb the next 5 years of population growth, not even the shortfalls that we currently have. So I think at every level, policy is not working, and it does take the government to step up and to be a bit brave and say, high-speed rail, let's do it. Building some regional cities, let's do it. It needs to take the government lead. Industry will make it work. The uplift in property values of those paddocks will make it cost effective, and they'll get in and invest in smart cities and create new hubs of employment there, because we need the jobs and the hospitals and the schools and the unis as well. They'll step in, but it does take government to take the lead and to get the planning right and to do the rezoning, and that requires a bit of courage and a bit of longer term planning, because this is a 20-year cycle, not a 3-year election cycle that's got to get it done. And we used to do this. I mean, we used to have ministers for infrastructure, ministers for city building, and we probably need to think that way, because if we're to build a nation to accommodate an extra 15 or 20 million people, that's like building a new country. And we do need brave, bold, long-term decision makers that have a bit of vision, like the leaders of the past, the Bradfields and the Chifleys, and those that stepped forward, and I think that's what's going to be required for our future.
Mark, I guess I said leave the floor to you, but I wonder if, including in that final wrap up, if you could just maybe build the vision for the people that are listening on how incredible the opportunity is in Australia. Previously, you've talked to an anecdote where someone, I'm butchering this, but imagine someone was in a petri dish and they had to create somewhere to live. Do you remember that story? Can you
Yes.
speak to that as a segue as to where the opportunity exists in this country?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're the lucky country, very appropriately, because if you were to design the perfect country, you'd probably make it an island nation, and that's what we've got. We don't have the problems of borders that you see in the US, that you see around Europe, that you indeed caused some of the challenges across Europe, and led to some of Brexit. With the connection there, we've got the benefit of that. We're in a temperate zone, so we can grow our own crops or our own food bowl. We've got a very educated society and investing in education, and that's what you need, that next generation with that, and with tech smarts. We we've got a can-do attitude. We're entrepreneurial. The power of small business. 2.2 million small businesses that in Australia. That's what is the engine room of our economy. Those small businesses, and that diversifies our economy and creates opportunity. We've got a well-performing property market. Take any 5-year cycle, and it just works. And it's a stable economy, a good solid democracy. Whichever side wins, this side or that side, it really doesn't matter in the long term, because our nation moves forward, and I think we've got to be grateful for that. And we've got social cohesion. The cultural diversity has proven itself here. We don't have the issues and the ructions that we see in so many parts of the world. So you have to say what a great foundation we have. And I think the next step is, well, what is this next generation going to do? What are we going to do about it? Are we going to move this country forward, or are we going to whinge and moan and say, oh, it's too hard to get a piece of the pie and a foothold in property, and it's broken? I think it's up to us. Every generation before us faced struggles and they got it done, and I think even this next generation can as well. So I guess my final message to fellow Australians is that this is the land of opportunity, and we've got to pick it up and grab onto it with both hands. If we can't make a go of it, who can? Because we're the best country in the world with all of this opportunity, and now with new technology, with AI. If we can't make a red hot go of it, well, there's really no hope for anyone. I think we can, and I think if we focus on the future, not just the past, if we look at our opportunities, not just what others had, I think we can do that. We can get there, and I think if we do it with a bit of other-mindedness, that's great. What I love about Australians is we're a very generous nation. 4 in 5 Aussies have given their own money in the last year to a charity or a not-for-profit, and many of those do it regularly. And I think that's why we're the lucky country, because we're not self-made. It's community spirit. It's by the opportunities that others have given, the neighbourliness, the mateship, rolling out the welcome mat. That's what is the Aussie miracle. And if we can build with a little bit of independence our own future, but have a look out for others, those that maybe are doing it a bit tougher, and have a supporting hand for them, I think we'll have community cohesion and individual success. And that's what really this country needs for the future. It's how we got here.
Well, Mark, this is where I stand up and give you a standing ovation. I know I'm already standing, but that is exactly the message that everyone needs to hear. So thank you very much for sharing it with our community, because it was an incredibly uplifting and optimistic view of the world. We can sometimes get saturated with all the negativity and all of the challenges that are around us, the upheaval, the geopolitical challenges, the cost of living crisis all around us. But you have made it very clear to people that this is a land of opportunity. There is an abundance in terms of choices that you can make if you take a hold of the reins and have a go. Yeah. Have a go attitude, as opposed to it's somebody else's responsibility to fix my problem. The moment we move to that mindset, we're on a downward trajectory. The moment we continue to keep this optimistic glass half full message out there, we'll continue to thrive, or not only survive, but thrive in terms of how this nation builds itself out to be the premier nation, which, I mean, we see our sports people in the Olympics, fourth ranked in the world. I mean, for a population of 26 million, outstanding result. Shout out to those Olympians who did us proud. But that's what you can do. When you put your mind to it, you focus, you put the hard work in, you get the results. Can't be any better said than what you just said right there. So thank you again. Outstanding in terms of that message.
I'll double down on that, Mark. And you can see why you're at the top of your game, Mark. So thank you for sharing your insights. Just for the benefit of the audience, we gave Mark no prep. He did not know what questions we were going to ask him. We just said we're going to base it on stuff that you do, and he did not skip a beat. And that's because we're talking to someone who is at the peak of their game in this country. So thank you for first of all, thank you for sharing your insights with our community. But just to sort of double click on Ben, thanks for being ambassadorial in this last 45, 50 minutes that we spent together, to just remind our audience that, gosh, class division is coming, folks, but gosh, you've still got an opportunity that everyone around the world would be envious of, to be if you live here and you have an opportunity to build some wealth base here. So on behalf of everyone on the Property Couch, Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Bryce and Ben. Thanks for what you do, and it's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thanks,
See you on the next one. Thank you. Oh, well, there you go, mate. Just you and I spending an hour with someone who's just fully engaged in just what makes this country wonderful. It was fun, right?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, double clicking on turning that income, that higher income, into a wealth transfer by obviously investing in capital assets, property, whatever it is, equities, just starting to build that momentum. There is some absolute gold in there. And, that really just highlights a really important point. I mean, it's obviously very much glass half full attitude and optimism, which we absolutely love. But this is the other argument that we also make on the pod, Bryce, and that is grow the pie, because what we don't want to do is slow the economic activity down, because there's less tax revenue that go around to look after our most vulnerable. Like, it's just harder. Everything's harder when the economy's not growing. So we've got to be very thankful for the living standards and all of that quality that we get through that economic advancement, through that intelligent advancement. I mean, we're not going to live, another 10 or 20 years on the back of that lack of knowledge, that lack of investment. And that all comes through that economic cycle in terms of that. So that gives us that opportunity to increase our living standards and then also, take care of our most vulnerable. If you don't grow that economic pie, you don't have enough money to go around to look after that 5 or 10% that need that extra support to hopefully break through that cycle and get on the other side in terms of that middle class, in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, no. So hopefully our audience got some enormous benefit. The goal on getting Mark was just to give people a little look around the corner to see what's coming. So we talked about a couple of things, but if all the millennials don't go, oh yeah, that was just a timely reminder that we do have a strategic advantage here. We got the highest incomes, and we adopt AI better than anyone else. So you've got a fork in the road decision. We've talked ad nauseum about how tough it is for millennials to get deposits, so we get that. But don't let it be the reason why you don't get ahead, because class division's coming, folks, and Mark just confirmed that.
That is a choice. That is a choice that we also get to make through our politicians and through making sure that everyone has opportunity. But the choice being, if we all sit on our bums, then there will be that division and there will be that haves and have-nots. Our goal here is to lift everyone by saying take action and do your hards, do your money management, because it doesn't have to be that way. But if our politicians continue to fight for a class warfare, or the actions of our nation and the people inside our nation, it doesn't have to be that way. We want to make sure that we try and bring as many people along, and that middle class is really important to avoid that unnecessarily have-nots and us versus them type attitude. So I hope and I pray that ultimately we don't necessarily move towards that story, because it's a narrative and it's a story that politicians are selling, and that's a selling to get votes and to get into power. And if you start doing that, again, I say go and have a look at Argentina's history in terms of being promised something, in terms of working for it, as opposed to then what you actually get in terms of overall living standards and quality of life. So I hope that's not the journey we're on, Bryce, because that is a choice that we get to make, and we're in control of that journey. So I'm hoping over the next 2 or so decades that the journey is, I've got to make a contribution and make an effort to make sure that I'm on the right side of middle class or whatever I want to do, as opposed to thinking that the government's responsibility to look after me, because that's the expectation I have, and that's how I'm going to vote. So it's really important that message gets through as well.
No one like that on our podcast, mate. We've got the
that's right. We've got doers. We've got doers.
I got to pass it on to the people they know. Hey, one of the infographics, we might put it up here for the for those watching at home, but I'll describe a couple of things. The social marker for the builder generation, Ben, was World War II. For baby boomers was the moon landing in 1969. For Gen X, it was the stock market crash in 87. For Gen Y, it was September 11 in 2001. For Gen Z, it was the GFC. And for Gen Alpha, it was COVID. What about the iconic cars? Model T Ford for the builder, the Ford Mustang for the boomers, the Holden Commodore for us, Ben. The Holden Commodore, as we call it, the Dunny Door. The Toyota Prius for Gen Y, the Tesla Model S for Gen Z, and autonomous vehicles for Gen Alpha.
Yes.
And I'll bring it home with these iconic toys. Builders, roller skates, boomers, Frisbee, Gen X, Rubik's Cube. Remember that, Ben?
Mm-hmm.
Gen Y, the BMX bike. I'd argue that I was a bit of a BMX bike generation too. Gen Z was the folding scooter, and the Gen Alpha was the fidget spinner. And the last one here, this is going to sing to a lot of people, Ben, pardon the pun, but music devices. For builders, it was the record player. For the
Yeah.
baby boomers, it was the audio cassette. For Gen X, the Sony Walkman, Ben. How good was the Sony Walkman with this? Yep, absolutely. For Gen Y, it was the iPod, sorry. For Gen Z, it was Spotify. And for Gen Alpha, it's smart speakers. So we would have had that graphic up. We might put that up for those who are listening at home somehow. But thanks again, Mark, for a wonderful contribution.
Wonderful.
I reckon everyone should be full of optimism about what the future holds for us here in the lucky country with that. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is a podcast recommendation. I found this one called Trivia for Kids, Ben. So you're driving long drives with your kids. And it's a bit like, it has rounds like trivia nights. So they go through and they say, the first question is this, second question, and then they wrap up. So it gives you a bit of think time and all that sort of stuff. Now, it is American. So there's a couple of questions like, who was the NFL team that scored the Super Bowl? Like, surely,
No, we're not going to know those ones.
But one of the questions was Peyton Manning, so my kids will know that. But so check it out. I'll put a link. But if you're doing long drives and you want to engage with your kids, and it's something that Andrew and I like to do with the boys when we're in the car, Ben, because let's be honest, the alternative is fart noises that seem to be funny for an hour, or just loud noises or screaming, or
typical boys.
Particularly with two boys 2 years apart. So we were looking for angles. So there you go. Check it out, Lifehack. Ben, what's making property news?
Well, I thought I'd build on what Mark was telling us about in terms of the research. So we didn't, I clicked on the income and wealth transfer that you can potentially do by those higher incomes. But the other big theme that came through our discussions was this whole fear of not having enough money in retirement. And we saw also a recent report coming out from Australian Super, and they've worked in with the Monash team around behavioural sciences and behavioural economics. And so they do a retirement confidence study report and a survey. So they surveyed 5,000 people across Australia. And here's some of the data. Less than half of the Australians, 46%, are confident that they will live well in retirement. But according to the new research that was conducted, retirement confidence can be boosted through simple daily habits as planning, goal setting, saving money, and paying bills. I mean, have we passed on that message to our community in the past, Bryce?
No, we
planning to become what you plan to become, goal setting, saving money, and paying bills.
There's an opportunity for us on the Property Couch, Ben. We've got to start.
We just completely missed it. I don't think we've ever raised it in terms of. Anyway, there's obviously and it came up in terms of wanting that financial independence and having enough in retirement, because we do get paid well these days, and we expect to have that same sort of level of creature comforts when we retire. But if we don't build a nest egg, we're not going to have that. Okay, we're going to have the default retirement, which is not very comfortable at all in terms of a pension retirement. So that is really important in terms of what you need to do there. The study shows that 67% of people with clearly defined saving goals feel more confident about their well-being in retirement. And that's the sharp contrast to 26% who don't have those goals. Please, people, please. We've even built a platform. It's called More, MRRR. You can set your goals. You can do some planning. You can manage your money. You can manage your properties.
Yeah.
It's there. The information is there. Whether you use our platform or someone else's, there is really no excuses. No excuses to take action.
No excuses at all. So there you go. Well said, Ben. Thanks again to Mark for his special contribution today. Thanks again to you, mate, for everything that you bring. And until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Act on it, folks. See you next week.